Hello, my friends. Welcome back. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.
The worst night of my life happened on a road that technically doesn't exist. They call it an ice road, but that makes it sound official, safe. In reality, it's just a stretch of frozen river and tundra that gets cold enough, long enough, for people to gamble their lives on it. For a few weeks each winter, trucks use it to haul fuel and supplies to villages that can't be reached any other way. I was one of those drivers. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't desperate. I'd been running that route for 3 seasons without incident. I knew how the ice sounded when it was strong and how it complained when it wasn't. I knew when to speed up, when to slow down, and when to stop completely and wait. That night, I should have turned back. The radio warned of dropping pressure and shifting currents under the river ice, but the delivery deadline mattered more to the company than caution ever did. If I didn't make it through, someone else would try. That's how it works up there. The road was empty, my headlights cutting a narrow tunnel through the dark. No trees. No buildings, just ice, sky, and the distant glow of the aurora smearing green across the horizon. That's when I saw the flare. A single red spark arced upward several hundred yards off the road and fizzled out. I hit the brakes. No one was supposed to be out there on foot, not in that cold, not miles from the nearest settlement. I called in on the radio. No response. Static swallowed my voice and spit it back warped and thin. Against my better judgment, I pulled off the road and grabbed my parka and emergency kit. The ice groaned under the truck's weight as I stepped down, a deep, hollow sound that vibrated through my boots. "Hello," I shouted. Nothing. I followed the direction of the flare, counting my steps, keeping my weight spread, listening to the ice like my life depended on it. Because it did. I found the source half buried in snow near a pressure ridge. A flare gun lay on the ice, cracked and empty. Next to it was a backpack, the fabric stiff with frost. No person. The backpack was old, canvas style, not something modern drivers carried. Inside, I found a thermos, a dead flashlight, and a notebook wrapped in plastic. The first page stopped me cold. It was my handwriting. Same slant, same cramped spacing, same habit of underlining dates too hard. The entry described a supply run along the ice road. My route, my company, my truck number. The date was 5 years earlier. I flipped through the pages, heart hammering. Entry after entry detailed runs I remembered making, storms I'd driven through, breakdowns I'd barely escaped. The last few pages became erratic, the writing shakier, angrier. Ice is wrong tonight. Hearing things under the road. Radio keeps playing my own voice back to me. I backed away from the pack, suddenly aware of how quiet everything had become. Even the ice had stopped complaining. That's when the radio on my belt crackled. "Driver 7, do you copy?" My call sign. I answered automatically. "Yeah, I copy." There was a pause. Then the voice replied, "Good. Don't stop this time." It was me. Not similar. Not close. Exactly me. Tired, flat, carrying the same edge of irritation I always had at the end of a long run. My throat tightened. "Who is this?" "You already know," the voice said. "You found the bag, didn't you?" The ice beneath my feet vibrated, a low tremor rippling outward. I felt it through my bones like standing on a live wire. "I didn't make it," the voice continued calmly. "Truck went through. Fast. No warning. I didn't even feel the cold for long." The realization hit me like a punch to the chest. This wasn't a rescue signal. It was a reminder. "I stayed," the voice said. "Not in the water. Not like you're thinking. The road kept me." I looked down at the ice, really looked at it. The surface wasn't uniform anymore. Beneath the clear layers, dark shapes shifted slowly, like shadows sliding under glass. "I keep the road stable now," the voice went on. "Guide drivers through the weak spots. Most listen, some don't." "Why show me this?" I whispered. "Because you stopped," it answered. "You weren't supposed to." A crack split the ice a few feet away, sharp and loud. Freezing water welled up, steaming faintly in the brutal cold. "If you turn back," the voice said, "someone else takes your place eventually. That's how it's always worked." Another crack, closer. "But if you finish the run," it continued, "the road doesn't need you yet." I understood then. The ice road wasn't haunted. It was maintained by the ones who didn't make it through. The flare hadn't been a cry for help. It was bait, a test. The ice groaned again, deeper this time, and I felt a pull beneath my boots like something gently tugging downward, patient and strong. I ran. Every step felt wrong, the ice flexing unnaturally, resisting me. The radio screamed with static and overlapping voices. Mine, others, layered and distorted. "Finish the run," they urged. I reached the truck and slammed the door, hands shaking so badly I could barely get the engine started. The ice cracked loudly beneath the weight as I accelerated back onto the road, headlights bouncing wildly. For miles, the road held. I didn't slow down. I didn't look back. When I reached solid ground, the radio went silent. The delivery was completed. No issues reported. No missing drivers. No incidents logged. I quit 2 weeks later. I don't drive ice roads anymore. I won't even walk on frozen lakes. Sometimes, though, when winter settles in hard and the temperature drops low enough to make the air ring, I hear a truck engine idling beneath the ice. And I know the road is still being watched. Just not by me. I have been looking forward to a weekend alone for weeks. My parents were leaving for a conference out of state, and for the first time in my life, I had the house entirely to myself. At 15, it felt like freedom, the kind you can taste in the quiet of an empty house, the kind where you can watch whatever you want, eat what you want, and go to bed whenever you want. The first few hours were perfect. I ordered a pizza, settled on the couch with a blanket, and binge-watched shows until my eyes hurt. The street outside was silent, the kind of quiet that usually made me feel safe. But that night it didn't. There was something in the stillness, something in the way the shadows stretched across the walls that made my skin crawl. I tried to ignore it. I was home alone, and alone didn't mean afraid. It started with a smell. Faint at first, like something burning, but there was no smoke, no fire. I checked the kitchen and the living room. Everything was fine. The smell lingered, subtle and sour, and it made the hair on my arm stand on end. Then I heard the first knock, soft, deliberate from the back door. My stomach dropped. I peeked through the window. Empty backyard. No wind, no movement, just the pale glow of the streetlight. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was a branch, maybe an animal. But when the knock came again, I froze. It was slower this time, heavier, almost impatient. I called out, "Who's there?" My voice trembled. Silence. The house, usually familiar and comforting, now felt alien. I grabbed the baseball bat from behind the door, feeling its weight, thinking it would somehow protect me. The knocking stopped, but then I heard it. Footsteps. Dragging. Heavy. Coming from the hallway that led to my bedroom. I froze. My heart hammered. I wanted to run, but my legs refused to move. The steps paused outside my door. A whisper followed, soft, almost soothing. "Don't be afraid. We're just here." I bolted to the kitchen, fumbling for my phone. Dead. No signal. Even a landline didn't work. I was completely alone, powerless. I tried to think rationally. Maybe someone had broken in, but everything was locked. The doors, the windows, every bolt and latch. And yet the footsteps continued, circling the house, moving with a precision that didn't make sense. I ran to the basement, hoping to hide among the boxes, but the basement door had vanished. In its place was a solid wall. I stumbled back, panic clawing at me. The air grew colder. My breath came out in ragged puffs, though the air wasn't cold enough to frost. The shadows in the corners of the living room twisted, stretching unnaturally. I could feel them moving toward me, patient, deliberate, alive. I ran upstairs, thinking maybe the attic could be a refuge. The stairs groaned beneath me, but it wasn't the wood. It was something else, some unseen weight pressing down. I reached the attic door and yanked it open. The space was small, cramped, filled with boxes of forgotten junk. I crouched behind a pile, trying to calm my racing heart. The whispering returned, louder, closer, circling me from all directions. "You belong here now," it said. I turned, trying to find the source, and saw my reflection in a cracked mirror leaning against the far wall. My own face stared back, but it wasn't my face. The eyes were darker, blacker than they had ever been, and my lips curved into a smile I had never made. I screamed and stumbled backward. When I looked again, the mirror was empty. The attic had changed. The walls stretched into infinity, filled with shadows, whispers, and shapes I couldn't name. Then I saw it, a figure stepping out of the darkness. My figure. Same hair, same height, same clothes, but calm, smiling, waiting. "You've been alone long enough," it said. "You know the rules." I tried to run, but the space shifted beneath me. Every step I took brought me closer to it. My own reflection reached out and touched my chest. Cold, impossibly cold, and then darkness. When I woke, I was lying on the couch. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows. The house looked normal. My parents were still away. My phone worked. I tried to convince myself it had all been a dream. But when I looked in the mirror, it wasn't my reflection staring back. It was the other me, smiling, patient, waiting. I ran to the front door. It opened easily. I ran down the street, past the neighbors' houses, past the familiar streetlights, not daring to look back. I didn't stop until I reached my friend's house. When I told them, they didn't believe me. The police found nothing when they checked my house. No forced entry, no shadows, no whispers. just me, and the lingering terror in my mind. I returned home the next evening, determined to convince myself it was over. But the house felt different, patient, waiting. I stared at the mirror in the hallway and realized the truth. It hadn't let me go. It had claimed me. And every night since, I can't help but glance at mirrors, wondering which one of us will be home alone next. I've been on cruises before, but nothing prepared me for the Abyssal Star. I was excited at first, boarding in Fort Lauderdale with my luggage and a sense of relief that I'd finally escaped my life for a week. The ship was beautiful, sleek and gleaming, like a palace floating on water. But the first thing I noticed was how quiet it felt. Not just calm, but quiet in a way that pressed against my ears. The crowd of passengers chattered, glasses clinked, music played, yet it all felt muted, as though I were hearing it from underwater. The first day passed uneventfully, or so I thought. I explored the upper decks, sipped my drink by the pool, and smiled at strangers. But every time I passed a hallway leading to the lower decks, I felt a chill, as if the ship itself were breathing around me. Crew members smiled at me, too wide, too perfect. Their eyes never wavered, never blinked like normal people's eyes do. That night, I awoke to a faint vibration beneath the floorboards, almost imperceptible but consistent. A low hum, rising and falling, like the heartbeat of something enormous. I got out of bed, traced it to the hallway, and saw something that froze my blood. The carpet itself seemed to ripple, as if alive, like water flowing slowly under my feet. I backed away and it stopped. The next morning, passengers began to vanish. At first, it was small, a man who didn't show up for breakfast, a child that didn't return from the kids' club. Crew members insisted everything was fine. People get seasick, take tours, wander the decks, one young man told me with a tight smile. But I could see the empty stares of other passengers who had noticed too. Something wasn't right. By the second night, the fog rolled in, not weather fog. This was unnatural, thick, white, curling along the decks as if it were alive. It swallowed everything. The horizon, the other passengers, even the pool. I could barely see a few feet ahead. The ship's horn began to sound, not in long blasts, but in short, staccato bursts like Morse code. I had no idea what it meant, and no one else seemed to hear it, or at least they didn't react. I wandered the decks in a panic, trying to find anyone who could explain what was happening. Doors led to rooms that didn't exist. Staircases ended midair. Mirrors reflected people I didn't recognize, eyes black and hollow, mouths open in silent screams. I began to notice shapes moving beneath the fog, long, dark silhouettes that mirrored the ship's every movement. By the third day, I realized the Abyssal Star wasn't just a ship. It was a predator. It consumed people, yes, but not their bodies, their minds. I glimpsed passengers wandering like marionettes, moving through corridors that no longer obeyed logic, eyes glazed, silent. I understood then. The ship reshaped reality around it, absorbing consciousness into its impossible geometry. I tried to leave. I found a lifeboat hanging from its davit and jumped in. The water outside was unnaturally still, black and viscous. I rowed, panicked, praying I'd escape. But the ship followed. Its outlines stretched impossibly, decks curving like a crescent moon. Shadows pressed against the railings, faceless, reaching for me. The fog rose behind it, and I could hear the hum, like machinery or the heartbeat of something alive. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time was meaningless. When the fog finally lifted, I saw land. A beach, white and sparkling, stretching endlessly. Relief surged through me. I rowed ashore, exhausted, barely aware of the forest that began at the edge of the sand. And then I realized the horror of it. There were people on the beach, hundreds of them, wandering aimlessly, pale, faceless, eyes hollow. They were the missing passengers, and in their midst, the woman I had glimpsed in the fog stood. Hair plastered her face, eyes black, watching me. "You can't leave," she said. Her voice wasn't hers. It vibrated in my mind. "You belong here now." I wanted to run, but the sand under my feet shifted like water. Each step forward was dragged back. The sky rippled unnaturally. I realized then that I wasn't really on land. The ship had followed me here, projected this beach, this forest as part of its reality. I was still inside it. I fell to my knees, despair crushing me. But then, as I looked at the faceless figures, I understood something strange. They weren't dead. They weren't even prisoners. They had surrendered. They had accepted the ship. It thrived on fear, yes, but also on the refusal to understand the panic. I took a deep breath and did the one thing I hadn't done since boarding. I laughed. A sound that was entirely my own, sharp and defiant. The faceless figures stopped moving. The sand stilled. The fog retreated slightly. I stood. I focused on the horizon. I would not fear. I would not submit. And then I saw it. The woman from the fog, the faceless passengers, they weren't obstacles. They were guides. The ship wasn't trying to kill me. It was testing me. I stepped forward and something incredible happened. The sand beneath my feet solidified. The forest opened a path, and I felt myself walking not into a trap, but into understanding. I could see the ship as it truly was. An ancient vessel, sentient, moving not just through oceans, but through dimensions, feeding on the weak-minded, growing with every fearful soul. And I had passed its test. I turned back and saw the passengers, faceless, turning toward me. They were no longer monsters. They were students, witnesses, guardians like me. The woman smiled, and I felt the ship's presence shift. It no longer loomed over me. It recognized me. I walked toward the water, toward the horizon, and realized something no one else ever had. The ship was not a prison. It was a teacher, a mirror of fear, a forge for those who could survive its labyrinth. And I had survived. I did not leave the Abyssal Star. I boarded it willingly, but I was not afraid. I understood its purpose, its hunger, its intelligence. I became a part of it. Not a victim, not a prisoner, but a sentinel, a guide for the next passengers who would come aboard. The Abyssal Star drifts somewhere in the Atlantic, unseen, waiting for those who seek escape. Most who board will be consumed. Some will vanish, but a rare few, like me, will learn its secret. I walk the corridors now, invisible to fear, invisible to the weak. I am part of the ship's mind. I am no longer just a passenger. And when the next travelers step aboard, I will meet them, not with malice, but with understanding. Because fear is the ship's language, and I have learned to speak another. I am its guardian now, and in that truth, I am free. I thought I knew what it meant to be alone in the wilderness. I'd camped and hiked all over the country, from the Rockies to the Smokies, and the solitude of the mountains had always felt like freedom. That is, until last summer when I decided to take a solo hike in a remote section of Yellowstone National Park. The trailhead was quiet, barely marked. I parked my old Jeep at the edge of the lot, double-checked my gear, and started up the narrow path that wound into the forest. The first few hours were perfect. Sunlight slanted through the towering pines. A crisp breeze carried the scent of wet earth, and I felt, as I always did in the backcountry, utterly alive. By mid-afternoon, I reached a fork in the trail. One path continued along the ridge. The other led steeply downhill into a valley I didn't recognize. There was no marker, no trail map showing it, but something about the descent intrigued me. I shrugged and started down. The forest changed almost immediately. The trees were older, twisted, their bark rough and blackened in patches that looked like old scars. Moss hung thick from branches, damp and heavy. The air grew colder, even though the sun still shone. And the further I went, the quieter it became. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind of silence that presses in and makes every movement feel wrong. Then I saw the footprints. At first, I thought they were human, bare deep in the soft earth, leading off the path into the thick trees. But they weren't like normal tracks. They were too long, too narrow, and they seemed to sink into the ground in an unnatural way. I should have turned back, but curiosity kept me moving forward. The valley opened into a small clearing with a stream, but the water was black, like oil, reflecting no light. I knelt at the edge to look closer and froze. My reflection was wrong. My face stared back, pale and hollow-eyed, and behind me, I saw movement. Not my shadow, not a reflection, but something on a bank. A figure tall and thin, with long, spindly arms that reached toward the sky. Its head tilted unnaturally, and though its face was obscured by shadow, I could feel its gaze. I stumbled back, tripping over roots, and the figure didn't move, but the air around it seemed to vibrate. I ran. The forest itself seemed to twist and shift as I ran. The trail I thought I was following disappeared. Every tree looked the same. Every turn brought me back to the black stream, and the figure was always there, standing at the edge, waiting. I screamed, but the sound went nowhere. It didn't carry, didn't echo. It simply vanished. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. Darkness fell faster than it should have. I tried to climb a ridge to get my bearings, but the slope was slippery, covered in moss and loose stones. I slipped, hitting my shoulder, and rolled to a stop in a shallow depression. The forest above me seemed impossibly tall, the trees pressing together as if to trap me. That's when I noticed the eyes. Not one, not two, but dozens of tiny points of yellow, glowing faintly from the shadows. They were everywhere, just beyond the edge of the trees, blinking and watching. I tried to move, but my legs refused. My mind raced. Predators? Bears? Wolves? None of it made sense, because these weren't animals. They were too still, too intelligent. I scrambled to my feet and ran blindly, following what I thought was a downhill path. I stumbled onto a clearing that shouldn't have existed, a ruined cabin, half swallowed by the forest. Its roof had caved in, walls rotted, but inside I saw something impossible. Hundreds of photographs tacked to the walls. Hikers, campers, families, all smiling, all alone. But every face had been altered. Eyes blacked out, mouths scratched away. Some faces were unrecognizable, warped into expressions of silent terror. A low hum filled the air. I spun around. The cabin was empty. Then I realized the photographs were moving. Faces twisted, turning to watch me. I stumbled back, tripping, and the door slammed shut. I was trapped. Panic clawed at me. I pounded on the door. I screamed. And then, from the shadows, a voice, human but distorted, low and gravelly. "You shouldn't have come here. I backed into a corner, trying to find an escape. The cabin itself seemed to breathe, walls pulsing like a heartbeat. And then I saw it, the tall figure stepping through the door. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like it wasn't bound by normal motion. "You belong to the forest now," it said. I bolted toward a broken window, shards cutting my hands, and tumbled outside into the night. The forest was different, darker, alive in a way I had never imagined. Trees leaned toward me, roots twisting like hands, branches snagging my clothes. I ran until my lungs burned, until I collapsed on the main trail far below the ridge. I flagged down a park ranger who happened to pass. They called for backup, but I couldn't explain it all. The pond, the figure, the photographs. They told me I was lucky to have found the main trail. Other hikers had gone missing in that area before, but no one could explain why. I left the park the next day, shaken but relieved. I tried to rationalize it. Exhaustion, hallucination, stress. I returned home and avoided forests entirely. Then, a month later, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. The ruined cabin, the photographs on the walls, and in the corner, a new face. My face, smiling. I realized the truth. The forest didn't want to kill me. It wanted to mark me. And now, part of it was with me, no matter where I went. I've moved across the country, far from mountains, far from forests, but I still see shadows at the edge of my vision. Sometimes late at night, I catch glimpses of my own reflection in windows or mirrors, and it doesn't look quite right. The eyes are darker, the mouth twisted in a way I don't recognize. I survived the forest, but I didn't escape it, and I know one day it will call me back, not to kill me, but to make me one of its own. Until then, I walk the world as a warning. The forest remembers. It never forgets. And if you stray from the trail, it may notice you too. I've always believed the mountains hold their own secrets, the kind you can feel but never name. I thought I knew them well. After all, I grew up in Colorado, spent every summer hiking and climbing, but what happened last September on a backcountry ridge in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains proved that even the mountains I knew best could hide horrors I wasn't prepared for. It began as a routine trip. 3 friends and I planned a 4-day loop along a remote ridge that seldom saw other hikers. We carried full packs, tent, food, and enough gear for emergencies. I was confident in my experience and leadership. I've been in more dangerous situations than this. The first day was everything you'd expect. Clear skies, golden light filtering through the aspens, the smell of pine and wet earth. We laughed, took photos, and made camp by a small stream that curved through a mossy clearing. But the second day changed everything. We woke to a cold fog that clung to the ridge like a blanket, swallowing the valley below. The trail, which had been clear yesterday, vanished under moss-covered rocks and twisted roots. Our map and GPS were useless. Every ridge looked the same. Every tree repeated in impossible patterns. It was as if the mountains themselves had rearranged while we slept. We pressed on, hoping to find the next marker. That's when I noticed the first oddity. Stones stacked into crude towers, dozens of them, all facing the same direction, toward the dark woods ahead. At first, we laughed nervously. Hikers? Some kind of prank? But the more towers we saw, the more I realized they weren't natural or playful. They felt deliberate, organized like warnings. By nightfall, We set up camp in a small clearing. The fog had thickened so much that the ridge disappeared entirely. All we could see were shadowed shapes of trees, skeletal and still. I lay awake, staring at the dark, feeling something watching me. Something was moving just beyond the reach of the firelight. I told myself it was a deer or a bear or maybe just my imagination, but it felt alive, intentional. Around midnight, I woke to a scraping sound, slow and deliberate, moving through the underbrush. I nudged my friends, but they slept. My heart pounded as I shone my flashlight toward the noise. Nothing, just fog and trees, but the sense of being watched intensified, pressing on me like a physical weight. Then I saw it, a figure standing beyond the edge of the clearing. Too tall, limbs bending wrong, head cocked unnaturally. Its face was hidden, but I felt its eyes. I froze. Then it vanished. Morning brought no relief. The fog remained, and we were utterly lost. Every ridge and slope was unfamiliar, even though we'd been on this trail hours ago. Rocks and fallen trees blocked paths that had been clear, streams shifted direction, and the sun seemed dimmer. My friends tried to keep morale up, but fear was growing in all of us. On the third day, we stumbled upon something impossible, a cabin in a small grove. It looked old, abandoned, and wrong. The walls were warped, the roof sloping at strange angles, windows uneven and too narrow. Yet it beckoned us. We were cold, hungry, and desperate. I didn't want to enter, but Carla pushed ahead. Inside, the air was heavy and metallic. Every surface was carved with names, hundreds of them, layered over decades. Some were familiar, missing hikers reported dead long ago. Others were unknown. My stomach churned when I saw my own name carved into the wall. Fresh, deep. The cabin seemed to pulse, almost breathing. Shadows stretched along the walls, twisting. I screamed as I turned to my friends. Jeremy was gone, his pack abandoned on the floor. Carla's face was pale, frozen in terror, but she was still there. Then the floor beneath us trembled like a heartbeat. Something alive, something impossible, was moving under the wood. I ran. I barreled out the door, into the fog, calling for Carla, but she didn't follow. Hours, or maybe minutes, time had no meaning, passed as I stumbled blindly, cliffs rising and falling impossibly, trees twisting toward me. Hunger and exhaustion blurred my senses. Eventually, I found myself on a familiar trail that led back to a ranger station. The mountains behind me looked normal, everything as it should have been. But Carla and Jeremy never returned. The authorities found nothing unusual. No cabin, no warped trees, no signs of anyone else, but I knew what I had seen. Months later, I received a text on my phone from an unknown number. It was a picture, a view of the ridge where we camped, fog rolling over the peaks. And there, standing in the mist, were Jeremy and Carla, smiling faintly, arms at their sides, eyes hollow and unblinking. Just behind them, a dark figure, impossibly tall, watching. I wanted to delete it, ignore it, convince myself it was a cruel prank. But deep down I knew. The mountains hadn't released them. They were waiting, trapped in some space beyond the fog, preserved by something that was neither human nor natural. And I understood with a cold certainty that one day, the mountains would call me back. The difference this time? When that day comes, I will go willingly. Because if I fight it, I might never see them again, and I've spent too long wanting to know the truth. The mountains hold their secrets, yes, but some secrets, I've learned, choose their own time to reveal themselves, and when they do, there's no escaping. I didn't plan to be out that late. I've been awake past midnight working from home, staring at code until the lines stopped making sense. Around 12:30 a.m., I decided to take a short walk, just around the block. 10 minutes, enough to reset. I live in a small Colorado town where the streets go quiet after dark. I'd walked at night plenty of times before, but that night felt different the moment I stepped outside. The air was colder than promised. The street light across from my building flickered, then steadied. At first, everything was normal. Then I realized I'd been walking longer than 10 minutes. I checked my phone. No service. The time read 12:31 a.m. That didn't make sense. I've been walking at least 15 minutes. I kept going until I reached a small park with a playground. The park lights were on. They were never on that late. The light felt too white, too clean. I stepped onto the path. The moment my foot hit the gravel, the sound of the town vanished. No highway, no wind, just my breathing. Halfway around the loop, I noticed something wrong with the playground. The swings were moving. Slowly, gently, back and forth. There was no wind. I stopped walking. The swings kept moving. I told myself it was residual motion and kept going. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Soft footsteps, like rubber soles on concrete. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I turned around. The path behind me was empty. The playground lights hummed faintly. The swings were still moving. I continued on, faster now. The curve of the path should have brought me back to the street, but there was no sidewalk, no road. Just more path. It stretched ahead of me, looping through trees I didn't recognize. The park felt larger, deeper, like it had unfolded while I wasn't looking. Panic crept in. I pulled out my phone again. Still no service. The time still read 12:31 a.m. Then I saw someone sitting on a bench ahead. A man, hunched forward with his elbows on his knees. Relief hit me so hard it made my eyes sting. "Hey," I called. "Do you know how to get out of here?" He lifted his head. His face was pale, eyes shadowed, but familiar in a way I couldn't place. "You shouldn't have come in," he said. His voice sounded like he hadn't used it in a while. "I just need to get home," I said. I pointed, then froze. The direction I pointed and didn't feel real anymore. I couldn't picture my building. The man stood up. "It doesn't work like that. You noticed too early." "Notice what?" He glanced at the path behind me. "That it's listening." The playground lights flickered. A sound rippled through the trees, like a breath being taken by something too large to see. "Who are you?" I whispered. He hesitated. "I was you. A few hours from now." I laughed, sharp and nervous. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking," he said. "I tried running. I tried waiting for morning. But morning doesn't come in here." I backed away. "I'm leaving." He stepped aside. "Then walk. But don't stop again. And whatever you hear, don't answer." Answer what? I asked. Before he could respond, my name drifted through the air. Soft, familiar. It sounded like my mother's voice. I flinched. That's not possible. The man's face tightened. Don't. The voice came again, closer, overlapping itself like several people trying to sound like one. I turned and ran. The path blurred beneath my feet. The lights pulsed overhead. My name followed me, spoken by voices I recognized, friends, co-workers, people I hadn't spoken to in years. I clamped my hands over my ears and ran harder. The ground suddenly vanished beneath me. I stumbled forward and crashed onto concrete. Sound exploded back into the world. Cars passing, wind, a dog barking. I was on the sidewalk, across the street from my building. I ran inside and locked the door. My phone buzzed. The time read 12:32 a.m. The next morning, I checked my phone's fitness app. According to the map, I'd walked in a perfect loop around the park for nearly 3 hours. At 3:47 a.m., the route stopped, right in the middle of the path, as if I'd been standing still. I don't go out at night anymore. But sometimes I hear footsteps outside my door. Slow, careful, waiting for me to take another walk. Waiting for me to stop. I got on a train in St. Louis just after midnight. The station was nearly empty, the kind of quiet that makes your own breathing feel loud. I had taken this route dozens of times, Chicago bound, overnight, but something about the platform felt off. The lights were dimmer than usual, and the few passengers waiting gave me strange looks, like they were expecting something. One man's stare lingered too long, and when I caught his eye, he simply smiled. Not a friendly smile, but one that made my skin crawl. I shrugged it off and boarded. The car was old, older than I remembered, with peeling linoleum floors and the faint scent of oil and dust. I chose a window seat in the middle and settled in. A few people were scattered around, all silent. An elderly woman stared at her lap. A man typed away on a laptop, and a teenager with earbuds stared blankly out the window. I tried to ignore them, pulled out my notebook, and began sketching, hoping the familiar motion of writing would calm me. The train started moving with the usual gentle lurch, but then the lights flickered. Not the brief flutter of old bulbs, but a pulse that seemed to echo through the car, like the train itself was breathing. I glanced at the other passengers. They didn't notice. Their faces were blank, distant, and their eyes held something I couldn't identify, something dark. I tried to focus on my sketching, but a sense of unease crept in. The shadows along the walls were thicker than they should have been, pooling in corners where no light should reach. The train jolted sharply, more violently than any track switch could account for. My stomach flipped, and my hands gripped the edge of the seat. The elderly woman's head jerked, but she didn't react otherwise. The others didn't flinch at all. I stood, needing to stretch, to reassure myself that everything was normal. As I walked down the aisle, the car seemed longer than I remembered, stretching almost impossibly. Shadows shifted unnaturally at the edges of my vision, and I thought I saw movement, figures at the far end, tall and thin, walking jerkily. Their faces were featureless voids, absorbing light, and yet I could feel their gaze on me. My heart raced. I turned to run back to my seat, but the door to the previous car had vanished. It was just a wall where the doorway should have been. Panic rose. I ran to the next car, hoping for something familiar. Empty. Completely empty. No passengers, no luggage, no trace anyone had ever been there. The floor had dark streaks along it, almost like shadows had been dragged and left to congeal. The lights flickered again, and the air felt thicker, pressing in on me, making it hard to breathe. I noticed the windows. Outside, it wasn't countryside or cityscape. It was black, endless, absolute black, dotted with faint lights that moved erratically, like distant fires, but not quite. Something in me recognized them, or thought I did. I wanted to look away, but curiosity rooted me to the spot. Then I saw the figures again. They didn't walk toward me. They glided, their movement jerky, almost mechanical. I realized their presence was connected to the train itself. The lights dimmed as they moved closer, shadows pooling around them like spilled ink. My mind screamed at me to leave, to run, but there was nowhere to go. Every exit I tried was blocked. A whisper brushed against my consciousness. Not audible, not spoken, but inside my head. You were meant to ride. I stumbled backward, hitting a seat. The air around me thickened, and I felt weightless yet pressed down, suspended. I understood then that this wasn't a normal train. It was a vessel, collecting people who traveled alone, observing, learning, choosing its passengers carefully, and it had chosen me. I sank to the floor, realizing that fear alone wouldn't save me. If I stayed, I would join the others, those shadowed figures in the black void outside the window, trapped forever, never leaving. I looked at the figures, trying to read any hint of mercy, and then one did something I didn't expect. It pointed to a window, beyond the blackness, beyond the flickering lights. I squinted, and for a fleeting moment, I saw something familiar, a stretch of highway lit by street lamps, the distant glow of a city skyline. The suggestion was clear. I could leave. I forced myself to rise, to take the first step toward the window. The air shifted as though the train were testing me, pulling at me, urging me to stop. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped through. The world snapped into focus. I was standing on a deserted platform at a small station outside Chicago. Morning sunlight filtered through the trees, and for the first time I could breathe without feeling the oppressive weight on my chest. The train was gone, no trace of its existence. I walked to my car, still shaking. I resumed my life, but night trains, they make my skin crawl now. Sometimes, I think I hear faint hums in the corner of my apartment, the rhythm of wheels on rails that don't exist. The memory of that train waits, patient, eternal, and I know it will never stop calling. And I know one day it will come for me again. I had never really believed in the supernatural. Halloween, to me, had always been about candy, costumes, and cheap scares. But that year, something happened that changed everything I thought I knew. I had recently moved to a small town in rural Michigan. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, and the streets were lined with old houses whose paint peeled like curling leaves. I rented a home right at the edge of a forest called Ravenwood. The locals never volunteered why. They'd only give me cryptic warnings. The forest, it has a way of finding people. I laughed, thinking they were being overly dramatic. The week leading up to Halloween, was unseasonably cold. The wind carried a sharp, metallic scent. It didn't feel like fall. It felt like the air itself was watching me. On the night of Halloween, I decided to take a walk through the forest. I liked the solitude. At first, the forest was quiet, but as I walked deeper, I realized the path had changed. Trees I remembered weren't there. The shadows stretched in unnatural ways, reaching for me without moving. Then I saw it, a house, small, old, with smoke curling from a chimney that shouldn't even have had a fire. I hadn't noticed it before. A strange compulsion drew me closer. When I stepped onto the porch, the air smelled like burned sugar and decayed leaves. The door creaked open. I swear I didn't touch it. Inside, dust covered every surface. But the most unsettling part was the mirror on the far wall. A full-length mirror, cracked in several places, reflecting a version of me that didn't move when I did. I froze. The reflection smiled at me, slowly. My mouth stayed shut, but the figure in the mirror grinned wide enough to split its face. I stumbled backward, and the reflection vanished. The house seemed to breathe. The floorboards groaned as if something were pacing above me. I wanted to leave. I ran to the door, but it wouldn't budge. Then the whispering began, soft at first, but it grew louder, circling around me. Voices, hundreds of them, calling my name. I backed into a corner. Doors appeared where there were none. A staircase led downward into darkness. I had no choice but to descend. Every step creaked. Shadows flickered along the walls, forming shapes I couldn't identify. At the bottom, I found a hallway lined with doors. Each door was slightly ajar, and inside, I glimpsed scenes from my own past, my most intimate fears on display. I realized with horror that the house knew me. I wanted to turn back, but the hallway had grown impossibly long. Doors multiplied, stretching into darkness. I could hear footsteps behind me, soft, deliberate, echoing in rhythm with my heartbeat. I dare not look. The whispers became words. "You belong to us," they said. "You cannot leave." Suddenly, a door swung open in front of me, and I was pulled inside. I landed on the floor of a small room, entirely dark except for a single candle. In the candlelight, I saw figures sitting around the walls. Children, adults, men, and women, all staring at me with hollow eyes. I recognized some faces from town, people I had passed on the streets. Others were strangers, their expressions blank, empty. The figure at the center rose, tall, thin, with skin pale enough to reflect the candlelight. Its face was obscured by a mask, cracked like old porcelain. It reached out a hand, and I felt a pull, as if gravity itself had shifted. I was drawn toward it. The whispers became screaming. I felt myself bending, my body reshaping, twisting unnaturally, as if the house were trying to absorb me. I struggled, but it was no use. My reflection in the mirror from before appeared in the candlelight. It moved independently, stepping closer to me, grinning, mocking. I realized the truth. The house wanted to replace me, to trap my consciousness here, leaving a hollow shell in the real world. Desperate, I grabbed the candle and hurled it at the mirror. It shattered, and the world erupted in chaos. Shadows writhed, walls twisted, screams echoed in every direction. I felt myself falling, spinning, pulled through a tunnel of darkness. When I landed, I was outside my house. The forest was normal, the sky clear. I thought I had escaped, but then I noticed something on the porch, a mask. It was my face, blank, expressionless, waiting. I picked it up, and in the reflection of the glass door, I saw myself smiling. But it wasn't me. In the weeks that followed, strange things happened. Objects moved on their own. Shadows lingered. I could feel eyes watching me from corners, reflections in mirrors that didn't match my movements. I tried to leave the town, but no matter the road I took, I ended up back at my house. Ravenwood didn't let go. It waited. I have learned to accept it. There is no escape, only resistance. The next Halloween will come, and when it does, I will be drawn back. And if I fail to resist, my place in the world will be filled by a hollow copy, a reflection waiting for the next curious soul. I write this now, knowing it may be the last time I speak freely. Never wander into the woods on Halloween night. Never follow lights that shouldn't exist. Because some houses are alive and some forests remember. And if you're foolish enough to enter, it will be your turn.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories.